time of our Patricia Carson Harrington Brown Bag Lunch Series. We're very excited to have this back after a 3-year hiatus during COVID. So I am the interim director, Carlene Berman. I see a lot of familiar faces, but for those of you I don't know, again, thank you so much for coming here to be with us today. This presentation will be recorded and it will be available on YouTube soon, pending no technical glitches. So I am very honored to introduce today's speaker. Lamar Bliss has spent much of the past half-century living in Canton and Potsdam. After graduating from St. Lawrence University, she began hosting a classical music show at North Country Public Radio, when it was known as WSLU-FM. Lamar recently retired from her massage therapy practice, which has left her time to explore music making, gardening, and family genealogy, which is what got her into being here today. She also volunteers in our archives, where her current and ongoing project has been to organize, house, and create a finding aid for the Dwight Church collection of letters, photographs, and ephemera that were donated by her family. So some of this collection will be available to view after the presentation. We've made a little mini exhibit over here. So feel free to, you can handle any of the letters. We have some copies of the letters she'll be mentioning in her presentation, as well as some photographs. And this is the first time these have been publicly available because the collection just came in and we've been processing it. So please join me in welcoming Lamar Bliss for what I'm calling her gateway lecture into a successful post-retirement career of public speaking about local history.
Well, thank you ever so much. First of all, I have to thank the St. Lawrence County Historical Association because over the last 50 years, they've been collecting bits and pieces of my grandfather's life, and they've kept them safe underneath the roof here. And so we have these bits and pieces that I walked into back in January and said, I wonder what's here. And so today we're going to find out a little bit about the things that we have here. So I'd like you to meet Dwight Perry Church, or as he liked to be called, DP Church. You know, like J.P. Morgan, J.D. Rockefeller, DP Church, the businessman and entrepreneur. He owned and operated a $5 photo company, and for 55 years of its existence, it was at the corner of West Main Street and Gouverneur Street here in Canton, New York, and Dwight liked to call the place Photo Park. At Photo Park, you could drop off a roll of film. It would be ready for you with prints the next day. He would do enlargements. He had a studio where he could hand tint some of the paintings, the black and white photographs, turning them into color photographs. You could also stop in and have your chauffeur's license picture made, or you could bring your whole family and have a studio portrait done in his studios there. Dwight also had a thriving postcard business, and there was nothing in St. Lawrence County, the Adirondacks, or the Thousand Islands that was too insignificant or too grand that it couldn't be captured on a postcard. So he had pictures of main streets, he had pictures of churches and schools, college campuses. There were pictures of playgrounds, pictures of cemeteries even, favorite swimming holes, favorite canoeing spots. All of these things were captured and published as picture postcards. And I'm pretty certain that there was no town in St. Lawrence County, the Adirondacks, or the Thousand Islands, Jefferson County area that didn't have at least one store that had a wire rack full of $5 photo company postcards. They were everywhere in this region. Well, Dwight Church was also an aviator, and when he discovered that he could take his camera up into the plane with him, well, this just made the postcard population explode, because he could take pictures from that vantage point of lakes and rivers in the Adirondacks and St. Lawrence Valley. He could capture the sites of college campuses, even document different building projects that were going on, like the St. Lawrence Seaway project. So this just built his whole postcard business. The other thing that he would do would be to take a picture of a local farmer's land, barn, fields, and house. And he'd go to that farmer's place and he'd say, "How would you like to see your farm the way God sees it?" Which, brilliant. And I know that anybody around here who has a farming family in their history, I would not be at all surprised to find that you have one of his air view pictures. He called those pictures that he took from the plane, he called them Skyviews. See your farm the way God sees it. Well, he was also an avid canoeist. In fact, he and his son David won the very first Rushton Memorial Canoe Race back in the 60s. But racing wasn't his thing so much as just being out on the water, paddling along a beautiful stream or on a lake, looking at the lake shore, the river banks, looking for signs of life in there. He loved reflections, and he just really adored being on the water, not just in St. Lawrence County. He also loved canoeing in Florida, and he even went out to Western Canada too to do canoeing there. In the springtime, Dwight headed into the woods, and that's where he tapped hundreds of maple trees and produced gallons of maple syrup, some of which he shared with the family, but the rest of it he sold to the customers who stopped in at Photo Park. And the other thing about Dwight, he was a very proud member of the Canton Rotary Club. But you know, I knew this guy as Grandpa Church. He was tall and slender, and oddly enough, he smelled faintly of wood smoke and boiling maple sap all year. All year. It was just the strangest thing. When we came to visit in the summertime, many days would end with a bowl of vanilla ice cream with maple syrup on it. Grandma and Grandpa would take us out to the sugar bush, and in the summertime, it was a fabulous playground. We would first of all snack on blackcaps, and then we would collect wood, and while Grandma and Grandpa made a fire and started cooking us hamburgers, we would head into the woods and play, my two younger brothers and I. When I got old enough, Grandpa put me in the bow of his canoe and taught me how to handle a paddle. And so then he and I would take my younger brothers for a ride on the little river, sometimes paddling as far as the Grass River in Taylor Park before we turned around and came back to the boat launch off of Route 68 in Canton. Every once in a while, Grandpa would take us for a ride in his airplane. So yeah, as grandfathers go, he really was pretty special. Well, back a number of years ago, the Grass River Heritage Project and the Village of Canton acquired the property at 7 West Main Street, a Photo Park studio. And boy, by that time, the house was terribly run down. It had to be demolished. But the Grass River Heritage folks in the village cleaned up the property, and they installed a park bench in what we used to call the sunken lawn out behind the house. And then they went and did one other thing. They put up a plaque and they dedicated the park to Dwight Church. And I said, huh, that's interesting. You know, who was this guy? I mean, sure, he was a wonderful grandfather, but if all it took in Canton was to be a wonderful grandparent and you could get a park named after you, there'd be a lot more parks in Canton, right? So obviously there was more to Dwight Church than just being a grandpa. So over the last 10 years or so, as I've been working on my family genealogy, I have been thinking about this question, who exactly is Dwight Church? Okay, so Dwight Church was born in 1891. He was born on a farm outside the village of Canton on the road to Pirates. Now, his father's name was Fred Church. Fred Church's grandfather came from Vermont and found this nice piece of property between Canton and Pirates and said, I'm going to farm here. And he did. And Fred was born on that piece of land, and Dwight was born on that farm as well. Dwight's mom was Jenny Pierce Church, and Jenny's family had a farm just about a mile from here out on what was then called the State Road. It's now known as Route 310, where the Finnegan Road branches off to the right. And the farmhouse is still there where Jenny was born. Right across the road from it is the Canton Apples place and the new dentist's office. Canton Apples is standing right where the old barn stood. So those were Dwight's parents. And he split his childhood living between those two different farmhouses for different lengths of time. So he was going to the one-room country schoolhouses out in those neighborhoods. Well, by 1909, he was done with school. He was also not going to pursue farming as a career. He had asthma, he had awful hay fever. The last place he needed to be was a hay field or anywhere near a hay bale. But that was okay because he had a brother who was definitely going to take on the farming business. And so somewhere around 1909, Dwight got introduced to photography. We don't know who did that, we don't know who trained him. All we know is he got hold of a camera. By 1910 and 11, Dwight had a couple of cameras and he had a bicycle and he billed himself as a traveling photographer. And the $5 photo company was born. This is Dwight. I love this. This is his family, his dad, Fred, his grandfather, William Dwight Church, his mom, Jenny Pierce. This is his youngest brother, Willard. Willard has a great story. One day in his early 20s, he left Canton and was never seen again. Another topic, or another topic. This is his brother Merton. Merton is the one who went on and took the farm over, Merton Church. And here's the older brother Clarence, who went and told people, but he went out to Chicago and had a business out there. I want you to notice something wonderful about this picture. These people, farmers, a farm family, but look at Dwight. Just a year into his photographic career, he's wearing a tie. He doesn't have suspenders. And he's wearing a tie and a button-down shirt. So there's the Church family. Okay, 1912 rolls around and Dwight gets married. He doesn't marry a local girl. He marries, his bride comes from California, and this is how they met. Now, Dwight's great-grandfather, this guy's dad, Willard, came from Vermont and started the farm. Now, Willard had a couple of brothers too, and they all migrated west from Vermont. Dwight's great-grandfather stayed on the Pirates Road, but the other brothers went farther west. One of them made it all the way out to California. But the branches of the family managed to stay in touch. And one day, a young woman by the name of Helen McNair wrote an essay and put it in the local newspaper as part of a contest. Now, Helen McNair's mother's maiden name was Church. She's family. Okay. So her essay is so good that it wins a prize. And what is that prize, you wonder? A train ticket to anywhere in the U.S. Really? You know where she goes? Well, she stops in a few places. She comes to Canton, New York to visit long-lost relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins. And so she's coming, the family's very excited. The day she's to arrive on the train, my grandfather gets up extra early and he finds a way down to DeKalb Junction where he gets on the train that she's on, finds her, and by the time the train gets to Canton, she's escorted from the train, the Helen McNair, on my grandfather's arm and presented to the family. Well, they got married about 5 months later. And she moved east and set up housekeeping on Maple Street in Canton, and he had the business in a small office in downtown Canton. Well, the family grew within a couple of years, and they needed more space. So the property on the corner of West Main Street and Governor Street came open. The house was a duplex. There was one apartment upstairs, one apartment on the first floor. Dwight moved the family into the second floor, and the $5 photo company finally had room to spread out on the first floor. He had room for a large dark room, workspace, a room where he could do formal portraits, a room where he could hand tint pictures. It was just perfect, and there he was right still in downtown Canton. Well, around 1917 when this happened, there started being some interesting things in the newspaper. This is one of them. Many cars go by. The number of cars that passed the corners at Photo Park on Sunday, August 12th was as followed by actual count made by Mr. and Mrs. Church. And he goes through each hour documenting the number of cars that drove past that particular corner. Now, if you walk over the bridge in Canton you're going to see the bridge that's just before Governor Street. If you're on the upstream side, look over the bridge and you see that rock formation, how that kind of messes things up there for the smooth flow. I'm here to tell you that that is not a natural rock formation. And when I was a kid, and we used to visit in the summertime, you know, of course you want to go swimming in the Grass River. So the weird thing was, I'd heard stories that there was some kind of swimming hole behind the house, but you couldn't even get down to the river behind my grandparents' house. We had to walk through a couple of backyards and we could swim there upstream. And my mom had the same story. She didn't swim back behind the house. Well, one day going through newspapers, I found this amazing article. A new swimming pool at Photo Park. The west channel of the Grass River at the bridge has been raked and prepared for swimming. Sand is being put in the bottom to make it good for wading. Several attractions are now ready and others will be added from time to time. The water is from 1 to 6 feet deep with open water for several hundred yards up and down the river. There's a good current to the water, making it surprisingly clear, and the pleasure completely distracts your attention from the fact that it is Grass River water. D.P. Church, the proprietor of the park, is part fish. He has visited many of the world's best beaches and says he will increase the attractions until we have a small Venice of America if young people of Canton and neighboring towns take an interest. All are invited to come and swim. If you wish to learn, make an appointment for a lesson at the studio office. When your friends return from their vacations in various summer resorts, you'll be able to bring them over to Waikiki and give them a surprise. The water is much better than you have in your bathtubs and is lots more fun. There's a trapeze and connection to warm up on after your dip. Come over and bring a carload of your friends. It's free to all. Dressing rooms can be arranged for. Come today, don't put it off until tomorrow, because there's not a great number of good swimmers in town during August and September, and we need you. If you can't swim, you can learn. It's a good time to get practiced up. Let's give Canton a swimming place. Tell your friends you're going today and they will get the fever too. Wow. Just amazing. And this was in the Commercial Advertiser. 1917. Well, Dwight had long since graduated from using a bicycle to get around. Cars were very handy, as it turns out. This is a picture from 1920. This is the 4th of July parade. Dwight was using his car to good advantage here. I believe these are his daughters, Mildred and Esther. Had yours taken, and a whole collection of photos. I'm assuming on the other side there were photos on that side too. A car was not only useful getting you to the place you needed to photograph, sometimes you needed to have the advantage of height. And when I first saw this picture, I burst out laughing. Because when I was a child, this picture is from 1926. When I was a kid, in the late 60s, my grandfather was still using this same basic technology, only he had a station wagon. And the back legs of the ladder came all the way down to the ground. It was sawed off part way so that the rest of it rested on the roof. He could still climb up and get the advantage of height, and I think his camera was a little smaller back when the 60s rolled around. So yeah, this was wonderful. And then there was this vehicle that Dwight had. This is wild. This is an actual car. It's registered in the state of New York. It's got a license plate. You can see the steering wheel back here where it says Kodak Finishing. I'm pretty certain this is going to be where you put the gas in the gas tank. $5 photo company in Canton, New York. Steering wheel, room for a passenger. The wild thing is, the family legend is, that Dwight drove this down to Florida at least once and back. So the man had a real knack for advertising. Just amazing. Okay, so by the late 1920s, Dwight got an interest in flying, and he discovered that he could afford a plane. It would be very useful for his business, and he contracted with a local farmer on the old DeKalb Road to use a portion of a hay meadow as a landing strip, because let me tell you, in the late 20s, there weren't many airfields around here. So he had a portion of a farmer's meadow for a landing strip, and he used a hangar there, a shed, as a hangar to store his plane. Oh, yeah, okay. Right. As it turned out, Dwight absolutely loved flying. And my grandfather had this habit. When he found things that he really loved doing, he liked to get other people involved. He was forever organizing skating parties, maple sugaring parties, sledding parties. He would organize canoe trips, you know, just a day-long trip or maybe just an evening on a river somewhere in St. Lawrence County. He really, and it wasn't that he wanted people with him to do things with, it was that he wanted people to have the opportunity to try things that they might not normally get to do. So you know what, he loved flying so much that this was another thing that he decided he wanted to give other people the chance to experience flight. So one year in the newspaper, I found this little item, and it said, "It's my birthday. And you know what I'd really like to do? I would like to take you for a plane ride. If you're at all interested in exploring flight, please be at such and such a field at such and such a time, and I will take as many of you as would like to go for a plane ride. I will take you." And well, the remarkable thing is that over the course of years, Dwight made a list, free airplane rides, 1930 to 1938.
Oh my.
Yeah. And now, the wild thing here is, this list is sitting out there at the end corner. I would be happy to make a copy of it for people, because if you had family members who lived here in town in the 1930s, I would not be at all surprised to find their names on that list, because there were a lot of people that took advantage of these, and you can still see some of these names on mailboxes in the surrounding area. So, you know, I just would not be at all surprised if you didn't find some of your family members on this list. Quite something. One last piece that he wrote about, this was an ad that he ran in the paper. 1931 is the year. Fly in October. Fly over a gay world of color on a bright October day. It is something words cannot describe. You get that supreme inspiration of air travel when you fly in an enclosed ship and ride along as you do in a car, but with the world at your feet. I take special interest in passengers who are interested in seeing how the plane is controlled, and sitting side by side gives one good chance. During the next few weeks, a free flight will be given with 12 portraits or order for same to be finished later on. Prices range from $3 to $20 per dozen, and this is the lowest price ever offered. Come now and avoid the Christmas rush. Thus far, over 100 persons have availed themselves to these goodwill flights. Any service that can be rendered with our ship to anyone will be a pleasure. Call or phone DP Church, Photo Park. Well, in the 1930s, there was a bit of upheaval in the church household. In the early 1930s, my grandfather and Helen McNair parted company. They divorced, and she went back to California. And within the year, my grandfather married a young girl whose name was Carmita Walters, and Carmita was my grandmother. Now, when my mom was a child growing up in the late 30s and the early 40s, there was a very familiar sound in the church household. And that was the sound of Dwight sitting at the typewriter, working on a letter or an essay. My grandfather had lots of ideas. And the same way that he liked to share activities with people, well, when he came up with what he thought was a good idea, he thought about it for a while, he put it down in words, and then he wanted to send it out to people who might enjoy knowing what he knew and might be able to help him bring it into fruition, or maybe he felt that they should know these things that he had figured out. So the ideas that Dwight had were, well, people have told me over the years, they say, you know, your grandfather was a Renaissance man, and I'm just beginning to scrape the surface of that. You remember how back in 1917 there was that article about the cars that went around the corner there? Well, my grandfather had a natural curiosity about all kinds of things. How many cars go around the corner here? What's it like? You know, how should a town be laid out? How could an airport be built better? How could we do things with what's called, wasteland? How could we turn wasteland into something that was more productive? He had all kinds of ideas. He came up with a village layout. He came up with a design for an airport, which he even went off and tried to patent. He had reforestation projects, wild river conservation projects that he thought about. He had ideas for highway design, also for that matter, for car design. And he was a big proponent of the rooftop highway, you know, the interstate that was going to connect Watertown and Plattsburgh. He was very into that for years and years. So one of the things that he came up with was a plan to install a hopper, a salt and sand hopper on the backs of cars, so that when you were driving in the wintertime and encountered icy roads, you could scatter some of that salt and sand. It wouldn't necessarily help you, but the next person coming along would get some traction. And Dwight was really into that. All of his ideas involved helping other people. So he did a whole letter writing campaign about this. He contacted car companies because they needed to build the hoppers. He contacted gas companies because he figured the gas stations were where depots would be to get your sand and salt. He contacted state highway department, local highway department, senators, congresspeople. He wrote the president, he wrote everybody about this idea. And a lot of people wrote back to him too, and all of those letters are in the archives here. One letter said that he sent out over 200 letters just about this one idea. So this man was very accustomed to sending out his ideas, and he did. When he died in 1974, Carmita went through his papers, and she left us with two folders. One was marked correspondence 1955 to 1964, and the other one was 1965 to 1974 when he died. I don't know what happened to the correspondence of the 30s that my mom heard him typing, or through the 40s. I don't know what happened to that. Maybe he purged it. But at any rate, we have a record of his thoughts from 1955 until he died. And I have selected 8 letters from what's got to be 200 letters that he wrote, maybe more than that. Plus he has a lot of essays that he wrote too. And then there were letters that people wrote back. But I've selected 8 of the 8 letters, and these are not carbon copies. I think that these are just rough drafts of what he wrote out and sent to people. 2 of the letters refer to his attitudes toward Vietnam. 5 of the letters are about race relations in the U.S. and other civil rights concerns. And then the last letter from 1969 is a letter about how the government should treat its citizens. Now you're going to notice something about Dwight pretty quickly in the course of reading these letters. Dwight and God were very, very close. Very close. Now Dwight was a faithful, regular presence at the First Baptist Church in Canton, but an hour on Sundays was really not enough as far as Dwight was concerned. I would say that Dwight had an ongoing conversation with God at any given moment of the day or night. And he wasn't always like this, okay? This was something that happened to him somewhere in the 30s. You know, somehow or another, God got Dwight's attention, and Dwight just didn't let go after that. Now, I keep coming back to the airplane, because there were some harrowing experiences that Dwight wrote about, places where the engine won't start, and when you're 1,000 feet off the ground, you know, that's not where you don't want an engine not starting. And when he wrote about these experiences, one of the things that he was very quick to do was to give God credit for the fact that he made it back to a landing strip. And I know that the family was kind of in shock when he died in a hospital bed due to illness and not in an accident somewhere. So sometimes I wonder, you know, if the whole airplane thing didn't bring him an awful lot closer to God. But I can say that it seems to me that there were some verses in the Gospels that were very, very close to Dwight, and I would say were kind of the foundation of his thinking process. In each of the Gospels, there's a scholar of some sort who comes to Jesus and says, "Master, what is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus answers him, and he says, "The greatest commandment is that you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, that you love your neighbor as yourself." And Dwight gave that some long thought. And he realized, that's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, most people think just so far when it comes to that. Okay, so that's how Dwight treated the next customer that came into Photo Park. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But Dwight stretched this in such a marvelous way, and you're going to see this in his letters. Not just interpersonal relationships, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. How does a town treat its residents? How does a country treat its citizens? Oh, and let's take it a step farther than that, said Dwight. How does a country treat another country? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Dwight took it right out to as far as you could go on this planet. So, we're going to see this very quickly in the letters that we're going to be looking through. A couple of things that I do need to note. Okay, so these letters are written in the language of 1963 through 1969, using terms that we don't necessarily use anymore. You're also going to hear a reference in the first letter to something called the Great White Fleet. And I was like, oh my God, what the heck could that be, Great White Fleet? Google Great White Fleet if you need to know more than what I'm going to tell you. In 1907, Teddy Roosevelt took 16 frigates and painted their hulls white and sent them out to circumnavigate the globe. First of all, to figure out how exactly the US Navy could do something like that. And secondly, there were ports of call in 6 of the 7 continents on the earth. So they stopped in, they visited with people, but it was just 1907, it was peacetime. But look at here, the US could actually circumnavigate the globe and stop at all these different places. So Dwight remembered that because he was a young man at the time in 1907. So he refers to that in this 1965 letter. The 8 letters that we have, a couple about Vietnam, that's right, civil rights, and also about a letter to President Nixon about how the government should be treating its people. Oh, all right, here we go. This first letter, 1965. The president, by the way, Johnson, has just had gallbladder surgery. He's taken a couple of days off at the ranch, and Dwight takes advantage of the break that he's on. He says, "Dear President and Mrs. Johnson, I have some things for both of you to think about. I was talking with a neighbor today about war, and he agreed that wars never brought peace, but he said, we have to defend our rights. What rights do we have to defend? Only our God-given rights, and they are given to everyone, regardless of race or color, life, health, and the pursuit of happiness, which when boiled down reads, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If we kill and destroy others, we must expect the same. Have you given thought to the fact that with our mighty armies, we do not overcome the tiny nation of North Vietnam? And what would happen if China should suddenly start sending 1 million soldiers each week? As a great Christian nation, if we are to overcome communism, we must fight with the tools of Christ Jesus: love, hope, truth, long-suffering, and humbleness. Send out millions of Peace Corps, a great white fleet of hope, care, and missionary men of goodwill, rather than grasping capitalists seeking how they can exploit the natural resources and native people of small countries. The reason why we have to fight wars is because we spend so much on military programs and so little on the fuller, better life. I think you're the best president our nation has had. God has given you a few days in which to think. Continue to meditate at your ranch for a few more days. And he finishes with a verse from Isaiah. He says, they that wait upon the Lord shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not weary. They shall walk and not faint. In due times, we shall see great things. Yours for Justice for All, church photographer. Yours for Justice for All was his typical way to sign off on letters in the 60s. A couple of years later, things are still going on in Vietnam, and he writes back to Johnson and he says, You are still depending on billions of dollars and mighty machines of destruction to lay waste a small nation and eventually other small Asian nations near Vietnam. Killing and demoralizing millions of poor men, women, and children is so far from the way shown by Jesus Christ as a way of life that it cannot bring peace, love, and joy to people, but only make more millionaires and bring our great nation into disgrace and destruction and hell. If we were to build a few hundred hospitals and send a few thousand men and women of goodwill to help our so-called enemies, it would do much more to bring peace and make friends for eternity than billions of dollars and thousands of bombs. There is still a lot of things in our own country that need doing badly. Dwight Church was so far outside the mainstream. I don't know about your memories of the 60s. I was a young person at the time. I was only 10 in 65. But boy, the young people, the hippies, were all protesting against the war, where the older people were all like, my country, right or wrong, US, love it or leave it. And then there's Dwight Church at the age of about 75, who just has a totally different view of how the US should be handling the situation in Vietnam. It's really something. Civil rights, racial relationships in the US. My grandfather made enough trips down to Florida. He drove through Georgia. He stopped for gas one time. He took some pictures at the gas station there. Whites only, coloreds only. As he was leaving the gas station, the owner sent some folks out to get him. They took his camera. They took the roll of film. They gave him back the camera. No, he was not going to take those pictures up north, that Yankee. So my grandfather definitely saw what was going on in other parts of the country, and he wrote a number of letters. We're going to look at a few. This first one is to Martin Luther King Jr., 1963. We have been following your efforts during the past few days and want to encourage you to keep faith and courage, and soon you will begin to see great things happen. The Lord don't work as fast as those great white monsters in Birmingham, but he is altogether righteous and just. Life magazine gave the world a good view of the Birmingham police officials. We must write to them, to Life magazine, and give them a word of praise. May I suggest that on all your peaceful desegregation marches and sit-ins, that you do a lot of singing? Music has power. With very best wishes, yours for justice to all, Dwight Church, photographer. He also wrote to Johnson and had some thoughts. In 1965, he wrote, I've been reading the constitutional amendments and find that Article 15 gives the Negro equal rights with whites to vote. Why then does not Congress see to it that Negroes get registered? I don't see why Martin Luther King should have to do it and risk his life among the fierce white racists. A few hundred armed troops sent into a small city like Jackson or Selma or Meridian with orders to prevent anyone from interfering with Negroes who wish to register and vote would fix it so that only a few days would be required to get the job done. There comes a time when in the course of human events, things like this have to be done. There's some other letter where he writes about the fact that, you know, if they sent troops down there, what they should do is have some bulletproof cars. And when they found people who were interfering with blacks trying to get registered, they would just take those people, put them in the bulletproof cars, drive them off somewhere, and they could just stay wherever that was until they decided to repent and get with the program. So, yeah. Well, things progress. It's 1967. Things are not going the way Dwight thinks they should. So he writes to Johnson again. He says, I am not a Negro, but I do wonder why all the white racists have become so disturbed, why so many congressmen, senators, lawmen, and so-called leaders of the people are rushing around to create curbs and laws to bind down the Negroes who have been demonstrating for equal rights as American citizens. And in the process, one or two white men have been killed. With my very limited education, I can see that these same people were not at all disturbed when the National Guard, police, and civilian whites killed about 80 Negroes. Certainly, God, who is all wisdom and power, can see only injustice and damnation in the hearts of these white cowards. Looking back to 63 and 64, I recall when the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, was burning churches and licking civil rights workers. The whites did not get too concerned. In fact, they did nothing except a few fine speeches. Boy, he had some real definite feelings about this. But he also tried a different tack. Besides writing to the president, he also got in touch with some business people too. And he wrote to Montgomery Ward and he said, I was looking through your new sales catalog, admiring the pretty girls' pictures. But as I turned the page after page, I kept expecting to see a model that might be a Negro or Vietnamese or perhaps a Jap. Strange thought, but perhaps it's a sign of the times. You must have a good many customers among the Negroes and other dark-skinned people in the USA. It might make a great hit if you use girls with black, white, yellow, and red skins. All white girls looks like segregation to people in big town USA, perhaps. Just a thought. What do other people think? And, oh, he also wrote this letter. This is in 1965, once again back to Johnson. Dear President Johnson, you have handled so many great problems wisely and justly that I feel you are the president to tackle these two evils. I trust God will give you the help needed. Here in the United States, we have the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, which is undemocratic and very dangerous and must be gotten under control by the federal government, because often the local police are cooperating with them. The other evil is a most inhuman thing. The state's laws that deny interracial marriages. Love has no legal bounds and is a matter between man and God. There should be a constitutional amendment permitting freedom of marriage in all states of the USA. Let's set our own United States right, then help other countries get cleaned up. 1965, and this guy is lobbying for interracial marriage when there are still so many effects of Jim Crow alive and well in our country. The guy was a visionary. Visionary is really just amazing. And I have one last letter for you, and this one is to Richard Nixon, a man that he didn't like an awful lot. He says, I object to a military takeover here in the US by order of the Justice Department. We have all seen what happens when the police interfere with peaceful demonstrations in several cities. I hope you will take a good look at Biafra and Vietnam, then do all within your power to prevent power from trying to overcome justice. It is like the devil trying to overcome God the Creator. It will lead to the destruction of the earth. I see things different than other men. I look for ways to relieve pressures that cause protests, fires, police battles and military takeovers. But this is why there's a park in Canton, New York that's dedicated to Dwight Church. It's because I see things different than other men. And I think that he really tried to live that golden rule concept and really expected others, other leaders and nations to live that golden rule as well. So thank you very much for your time today. And I know that we're moving right up there towards 12 o'clock, and I am happy to entertain questions. I don't have a job, so I can hang out and chat. Thanks ever so much.
Did you hear back from President Johnson?
Yes! Oh my gosh, he heard back from lots of people. They're all up there in the archives. Now, some of them, some of them were very, form letter. In fact, there, in a couple of occasions when he wrote to Senator Javits, he got back the same exact letter, even though certainly the tenor of his letters had changed. So yes, he got back a lot of letters, and they thanked him, for praying for them. He thanked them for, they thought that President Eisenhower was also very aware of biblical principles and things like that. So yeah, but yes, he did hear back from people about some of his topics, though they were fairly general answers. Yeah.
Well, do I send us a book?
Well, not by me. But gee, thanks. I don't know. That was not my bucket list. Who knows?
Lamar, did he correspond, or was he in contact with local, the state, or local?
Yes, he definitely wrote to his state, he wrote to a number of state officials. He wrote to the mayor of New York City. I found one letter to the mayor. My brother and sister-in-law raised a very interesting question. He said, did he write many letters to the editor? I think they would have been in the Plain Dealer. And I haven't taken the time yet because it's not online and I can't do it from the comfort of my couch. I haven't taken the time yet to go look. Yeah.
The Plain Dealer, I believe, is online on the Fulton History website.
Okay, I will go check that out. Because I'm curious too, how many letters to the editor did he write? How many townspeople really sort of knew the breadth of his concepts and what he was after as far as the world went? So it's a good question. I know he wrote to some people.
There is the, what did you say, the Fulton site,
Right.
Northern New York.
Yeah, the historic newspapers, yes. But I don't find many letters to the editor. I mean, I'm looking for things like the St. Lawrence Plain Dealer and the Watertown Daily Times, because those might be two places that he did send out letters to the editor, and I really haven't explored that enough yet. I've been concentrating mostly on the collection that's right here at the archives, and these letters are just a remarkable insight into the time, and remembering that these were all written basically in the mid and late 60s, and what was the world like back then at that point, and how far outside the mainstream. And I always like to say that the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, and this is one place I really hope that's true. So, yeah. But at any rate, yes.
Lamar, I totally love this introduction to your grandfather and learned a lot of things about him I'd never heard before. But for people who've now been introduced to him and would like to really look at his photo collection, what are the options for people accessing the photographs?
Well, St. Lawrence University, after my grandfather died, my grandmother put together somewhere 12 to 13 prints and negatives and sent them over to the archives at St. Lawrence. And back in the early 90s, we went through all of those pictures, and they are somewhat organized. They're in a database. It is not, if you want to find something on the St. Lawrence campus, you're going to be scrolling through a lot of images. Not all of them are scanned and online. Almost every town historian's office, I'm going to guess, has got Dwight Church postcards, and someday maybe I'll make the rounds and find out where they are and what they have. The St. Lawrence County Historical Association has lots. The town of Canton has recently moved its town historian offices down the street, and boy, they want to have a whole room full of Dwight Church pictures, so that'll be a good place to go. So those are the places that come to mind right off the bat. That's what that is. The pictures are out there. In fact, if you have old black and white pictures, and they were done here in Canton back in from the 19-teens right up through the 1970s, yeah, that was my grandfather's work, is my guess. They were dropped off at Photo Park and picked up there too. Other questions? Yeah.
I have a picture of my family. There were 8 of us children, and my youngest brother was born in 1936. And I would think the picture was taken probably in 1938. And I remember it because I wasn't very tall. I was right in the middle of the 8 children. And because I was so short, he had me standing behind the sofa, but I couldn't see over the sofa. So he had me standing on a big, thick book.
Oh, good.
Not so
So you were in the picture too.
I still have the picture,
Oh.
and I was hoping I'd get to dig it out and bring it, but I
that would have been so lovely.
at the time.
Yeah. There's a picture of me holding this coconut head. For some reason he had this prop in his studio. I guess it was maybe to make kids laugh or cry. I'm not sure. He had so and I have a picture of that.
But he actually took 2 pictures. I'm not sure when the second one was taken, but it was 2 or 3 years later.
Well, we don't have those personal sorts of pictures. The only photographs that my grandmother gave and that Dwight kept were the postcards.
was in the-
Yeah, his commercial photography and not so much the studio portraits.
But that first one I remember very clearly.
Oh, that's so neat.
I was standing on the book. And I wasn't very old either.
You had a question, sir?
What year did you say he started flying?
It would have been 1928 or 29. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
His student permit is right there on the counter. He got the plane, I think the plane came with free flying lessons, so he got the plane and flew it home and realized that he really ought to go get a license for that thing. So he flew the plane out to Western New York, the Becker Air Service, and did all the coursework he needed and came home a licensed pilot. And at that point, that was somewhere around 1929 or 1930. Yeah.
Lamar, how did he take pictures and fly the plane at the same time?
Oh my God. This is a story that my mom writes about, and I don't know what he did. I don't know entirely what he did, but my mom wrote the story about how she used to go up in the plane with him. She'd sit in the back seat of the plane, and when my grandfather got to the right place, he'd sort of put the plane in a bank. And you should also know that he tried a number of different methods to get pictures. He cut a hole in the floor of the plane, but that didn't work so well. So he took the door off the pilot's side of the plane, and that worked better. He could sort of lean out and take pictures, but he would put the plane in a bank. And now, I'm not entirely certain, and I'm too scared to ask, but I think he just puts the plane in a bank and it sort of stalls out, right? He tells my mom, okay, now, she hands him the camera. He takes the pictures. The plane is circling down and down and down. He hands the camera back to her, and the plane starts up again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is why he died in a hospital bed due to illness. Who knew?
Whereabouts in Florida did he go when he went to Florida?
I could not tell. Peace River. I know he
Okay.
mentioned something about the Peace River.
That's in West Central Florida.
Yeah, I think so. But I don't really know.
Okay, thanks.
And Canada, he
Oh,
liked
yeah.
Lake Louise. That's where he had around the western part of Canada.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I would be really happy to do another talk about his airplane stuff and his harrowing experiences. Maybe his ideas, I don't know, some of them are a little out there, but they're interesting, sort of. But if you have any suggestions for things you'd like to talk about, please let the folks here know. They'll get in touch with me. So.